The Doom Logger, written by Marie D. Henry, copyrighted in 1996. Vance Kyle worked as a teamster for the John Benson Logging Company, and with his team of matched black Canadians, his job was to haul the logs from the cutting grounds to the holding yard that was located on the banks of the Tedigush River. There they were piled in huge piles ready to be floated to the mill on the river's rushing waters during the spring dry. Each teamster and his horses were also expected to go to the company's store once a week to get supplies for the men in the logging camp. Every second week of the month was Vance's turn, but the weather had been so stormy that he was not able to leave that morning as planned. Now it was 10 p.m., and the weather seemed to be not as bad as it had been. January in the woods of New Brunswick can be a test of endurance at the best of times, but this January was proving to be the worst in many years, weather-wise. As the men huddled around the barrel-bellied stove in the bunkhouse, the door opened, letting in the biting cold and Mr. Benson. He ambled over and held his hands in the heat of the stove, rubbing them together for several seconds before he spoke. "Good evening, boys." "Good evening, boss," greeted several of the older men. Tom, the foreman, asked, "What is the temperature like out there?" "The temperature is awful. It keeps going up like this for much longer. It will make the snow too frosty for pulling." Mr. Benson turned his attention to Vance. "I want you and Dave to go get the supplies in the morning. Pick up the order sheet at the cookhouse." He returned his attention back to Tom and his question about the condition of the snow. Vance looked at Dave, who was sitting across the bunkhouse on the foot of his bunk bed. He saw in Dave's eyes the reflection of his own thoughts. "I hope we don't have to stay at the halfway camp." At 3 o'clock on Monday morning, Vance shook Dave awake. They got dressed in their heavy mackinaws, woolen pants, mittens, and sheepskin-lined boots, and slipped out of the bunkhouse. Outside, the frost burned their nostrils with each breath, and the snow squeaked loudly under their footsteps. Loud bangs from the woods shattered the stillness as frozen branches split away from their tree trunks under the pressure of their frozen sap. The horses pawed the floor and jingled their halter rings as Dave began to harness Bessie. Vance went to Cherry's stall. Dave threw the harness over Bessie's back and looked over at Vance and asked, "Do you think we will have to stop over at the halfway camp? I don't hanker to spend the night there." Vance tightened Cherry's cinch strap. "If it stays clear, we should make it to the settlement before midnight." He backed Cherry out of her stall and led her towards the stable door. Dave followed with Bessie. Once outside, they got the team into the neck yoke and hooked up the traces. Then they drove over to the cookhouse. At 7, the sun came up with reluctance, turning the sky from tar black to steel grey. It was clear noon when they passed the halfway camp. It sat peaceful and inviting under the cedars. The stillness of the scene was broken only by the call of a lone blue jay. Jay, jay, jay. Vance looked back at Dave sitting at the back of the sled. I'm starved. Do you want to stop here for lunch or eat at the lunch hole? The lunch hole would be a better place. There is shelter for the horses. If we eat here, we will have to make a place in the snow to boil the water can for tea. Let's go on. It's only about a mile. Dave looked back at the cabin, pardon me, as the horses took them around a bend in the road. I hope we don't have to stop here on the way back. The horses trotted along smartly, and in no time at all they arrived at the lunch hole. Vance turned to Dave. You get the team their hay and oats. I'll get the fire going. Vance busied himself with the firewood, always left for this purpose, glad for the work to get warmed up. Within 15 minutes they were seated on blocks of wood, eating heated beans piled on thick slices of bread. The hot tea and food chased the chill from their bones as the roaring fire fought with the cold to get them warm on the outside. It danced and crackled, spraying the frosty air with hot sparks. Bessie and Cherry munched the hay Dave had put in front of them. At 1 o'clock they resumed their trip and arrived at the company store at 8 that evening. To be continued.